Hey, how you guys doing today? Good to see you all. Hopefully we will get the rest of the people. Oh, 13. Yes, everybody's showing up. Good. Uh, I don't know what it's like where you are, but the weather here today is tremendous. It's tremendous. It's a good day to be out. But we'll be in here for a few hours, and hopefully it'll be worthwhile. Um, so, what I'd like to go over today in class is a few things that happened. People had questions, and there were some people I asked you to remind me to go over something in class with your assignment. If you could just put a message in the chat. It doesn't have to be a private message, just a message. I have everybody's homework downloaded. But I think what we'll do today is we'll start off with something that's Chris, which took me a minute to figure out. And so we're gonna do this, and then we're going to I'm going to talk to you about reverb today, and then we'll spend some time going over the final project, some strategies for affecting that, and a few things I think you should think about as you're getting started on that, which hopefully you are. Now, the first thing is that I get this error message here that shows up. And let me zoom in on this. Missing files. 11 audio files are missing. Would you like to, well, automatically find and relink? That would work, but what happened here is that if I look at Chris's session folder, there were no audio files in the audio files folder. So I think what most likely happened was that when Chris went to import, the blue copy button was highlighted, right? And he probably just saw that it was highlighted and hit it. But what you have to do is you always have to do copy. Or no, there's one that says add. Right? That was probably highlighted, and you don't want to add. You want to either copy or convert.
I think I just dragged the files in from the folder that I downloaded from
Right.
the. I just assumed that it would be in there.
No, so it would be in there if it was at a different sample rate, because then Pro Tools would have to convert it and then create audio files that it would put in the audio files folder. Right. So that's why I'm not a big proponent of dragging the files on, because you don't get the proper folder structure. So you have to either copy or convert, and you would convert. Let's say that you were working in 44.1, and then for some reason maybe you needed to spot it to a piece of film that where the audio was in 48. Then you would convert it, and it would just add the extra data onto the file. It wouldn't change the sound. So you either copy or convert. But that's okay, because I'm just going to skip all, hit OK, because what happens is you could see that the spots where the clips would be are outlined here. Even though there's no data in it, Pro Tools remembers the edits that you did, and like the way you chopped up the file, the clips, right? It remembers the names of the clips, but you see it's italicized, which means that it's not there. And furthermore, if I do this, right, and I look at my clips list, you can see that they're all grayed out and italicized. That's because they don't live here. Right? They live on your computer. And my computer can't communicate with your computer. All right. Right. So what you would do to fix that, right, is you would take those files and you would drag them into the audio files folder. All right. So you take those files and you would drag them into your session folder, the audio files folder. Okay? Then there's another step that you have to do in order to make sure that everything is properly structured, because that'll work, but I'll always get that dialogue at the beginning of the session, and then I'll have to ask it to link the files. So in other words, you would think that after Pro Tools does it once, that it would remember every time that it would link up the files to that folder, but it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. So what you would have to do is you'd have to go here and you'd have to save copy in, right? And you'd have to copy the audio files. And then you hit OK, and then you would just, title this version 2 or whatever. You can get rid of the copy of version 2 or whatever you want to title it, and then you would save that, and then you would close out of this session and open the other session, and then all the structure, as long as you copied those audio files, it would set up a new session with the structure perfectly set up.
Pete, I missed that. I don't understand what you're saying. So you're saying once you relink and save, it's not gonna remember the relinking? Correct.
It always works. I always have to. It always on my setup, Ken. I always have to relink afterwards. I've sent you sessions like that where you've had to like constantly, relink, or if it's missing an audio file.
After I saved once, I don't have that issue. Maybe I don't know.
I have that issue.
Interesting. Okay, cool.
Pete, I have a question. When I loaded in your audio files, I had to do it twice. I had to open up my session because my computer is set to 48 kilohertz. So I had to open up a new session and set it to 44.1. Then it didn't say it's at a different converted rate. Is that the right move? But am I compromising, or there's nothing I could have done because you created it in 44.1?
Yeah, so you could have opened it up in 48, Paul. That would be fine. It would just add that extra 4,000, bits of data, which would be blank, right? So it'd be empty data, so it wouldn't mess up your audio. But if you had just dragged those files in and it was 48, it might not have converted them to 48, so then the files would go at the wrong speed. They'd be playing at 44.1.
That's what happened. The files went at the wrong speed, so I had to reopen the session in 44.1. I figured out how to do that.
Yeah. Okay. So how did you import? Did you just drag them onto the timeline?
I did it the way you showed us, import. No,
right.
I didn't drag them on. I went to import and I found the brass files and I put those in. When I saved my session, when I set it up as 44.1, then it was, it worked and played back at the right tempo.
Okay. Yeah. So it should, if you're going to convert it, it should automatically convert it when you import it this way. So I'm not quite sure. You'd have to show me what you did, and then I'd be able to give you a little greater feedback on that. But basically what happens is if you have audio files, okay, thank you, Andy. If you have an audio file that's at 44.1 and you load it into a session that's playing back at 48,
that's what I did.
And you don't convert it, it will play back at a different pitch and a different tempo because it's
right. It asked me if I wanted to convert it, so I wasn't sure what to say, so I just X'd it out and I reopened the
So you should have
session.
converted. Right, you should have converted it.
Oh, well, it's the same difference. I didn't do much, so at that point, right?
Right, but if you had converted it, then it would have played back. It would have added the extra data onto the 44.1, created new files with that extra data, and that extra data would just be blank ones and zeros. There would be no audio on it. In other words, it doesn't add any audio. It just adds
right, but
data.
isn't it essentially the same thing?
Well, it has to convert it to 48 if your sessions are in 48.
But then it asked me to set up that session at 44.1, and then I didn't. It would run fine. I changed.
I don't know. I'm not quite following how that would work because I've never quite experienced that. What you're saying. So basically, it doesn't tell me to change the sample rate of the session. It asks me if I want to convert the audio that I'm importing.
Okay. Maybe it's different on the PC. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that could be true. I don't really know anything really about PCs except we share initials.
Okay.
All right.
Well, that's a good. Thanks, Pete.
Yep. All right.
I'll figure it out.
So
that was hysterical.
What? Oh,
that was so funny.
Oh, are you like weeping, Al?
Weeping.
You're totally destroyed.
I am destroyed.
You make sure you can pick yourself up off the floor. All right.
Ah,
Actually, you know, that's a Coltrane tune also for Paul Chambers, as everybody knows. Okay, so it doesn't really matter that there's no audio files here. The data is here, and we can move it. So now if I hit return, right, we see that this session starts at 21:757. So what Chris wanted to do was he wanted to have somewhere be a measure 1, right? He wanted somewhere to be a measure 1. Now, if we zoom in here, right, and we go to event and time operations and move song start, and well, hold on a second. Let me hit return. So if I move song start, right, so that this is now, we renumber this to measure 1, right? We've got measure 1 here, but the problem is that these are now not aligned up with our all the markers that he did, right? So the audio files stayed at the same position if it was minutes and seconds, right? They are at 8 this time frame. And the reason for that is that audio files are anchored to samples and not ticks. Right? So can anybody besides Ken and Mark Bonder explain to me the difference between something being anchored to a sample or a tick? Any difference?
Well, the sample would be the length in time, and the tick would be in tempo dependent.
That's
per
correct.
beat.
Right. Correct. That's the right concept. So basically, a tick is a point on the timeline in bars, beats, and subdivisions of that beat. And it's always that same musical notation, right? It's always at measure 20, beat 4, tick 480. No matter what the tempo is, right? So if the tempo is at 60 beats a minute, that's going to be at, 20 bars times 60, 20 times 4 is 80 times 60. It's going to be, whatever, 1 beat per minute. So it'll be like 80 seconds into the piece, right? Something like that. If it was at 120 beats per minute, that same spot on the score, on the notation, on the bars, beats, and ticks would now be at 40 seconds in. This audio is going to stay at 8 minutes and 5 seconds no matter what the tempo is because it's locked to samples as its time base. So let me undo, right? So, right, that was at 8:05. So, right, I undid that. Now our first measure is still 20. And notice it's still at 8 minutes, 5 seconds, and 849ths. So this stays the same. So the solution to fix that so that all of this stuff stays aligned is to simply change the time base of the audio files to ticks, because then they're anchored to a spot that's based on bars and beats. Right?
Hey, Pete, so if you're ever working with a click track or something in time with audio, shouldn't you just always switch it over from samples to ticks?
Yeah, but Ken, it's not going to change the tempo of a piece of the audio file unless you turn it to elastic audio.
Right, but I'm just talking about for simple alignment and stuff. Does it make more sense? Because if you're going to be moving markers or
probably. Although you can select sample based. You can select to move things that are sample based as well as tick based. But for some reason, I wasn't getting that option when I went to move time operations. So now, if I hit return, and remember this was at 8 minutes and 5 seconds, right? Just remember that, 8 minutes and 5 seconds. So I hit return, and then I go here to time operations, and I move song start so that it's number 1. See, now that's at 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And all of these things are now aligned properly. So now what you can then do, which is kind of cool, is now that you've got measure 1. So let's say that we want to go to measure, let's say we want to go to measure 5. This way you have some pre-roll and make that measure 1, right? Then you can go now to event, move song start, and you can renumber the song to 5. And then all this stuff moves. And then now you've got a little pre-roll, and your measure 1 starts here. And so that's how you would fix that.
Can you do that one more time for me, Pete? I know this stuff, but I'm not quite sure the order you did.
Let me just make sure that I'm okay. Right. So I'm back before I did any fixing. All right. Right. So this is like as I opened up the session. Now the
problem was what exactly again?
There's no measure 1. I'm all the way back at the beginning. I'm at measure 20, 1/257. Right? And he did all this work already with markers and chopping stuff up, and he wanted to keep all that work and have and like use this as his workspace so that he could, edit the audio and then place it in the timeline as he's constructing his piece. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So what he wants is a measure 1 somewhere, right? So I hit return and I'm at measure 2757, or I'm at this time. This is minutes and seconds, but the bars and beats, it doesn't match up. So I've changed all of my audio files to be ticks based. Go to time operations, move song start, and then minutes and seconds, right? Renumber the song start to measure 1. So now go bars and beats, and I hit the return key, and now I've got measure 1. Now, let's say you want to add some pre-roll or some leader tape to the beginning of Pro Tools, like a few bars up front, so that if you're going to record live audio, you'll have a count in and you'll still maintain your bars and beat structure. You want to move measure 1 so that it occurs later on in the timeline and keep all this stuff still aligned. Well, that'll all stay aligned because we've got all our audio files. The time base is now ticks instead of samples. So it's a very simple matter to type in measure 5 and then go again to time operations, move song start, and right, and then bars and beats. So here, right, now here I can move sample based markers and tracks, right? But before, for some reason, this wasn't an option for some reason when I first opened this up. Right? So then I had to change the time base. So now if I hit apply, everything is stayed aligned and measure 1 starts right here. And we've got all this pre-roll if we're going to have somebody play right at the downbeat or do a pickup and still maintain our structure of our bars and beats.
I'm going to ask one more quick question pertaining to this, Pete. If you had wanted to move all of that data to measure 1, right, and you wanted to take the markers with you, what's the easiest way to do that?
There's 2 ways of doing it, Ken. Right? I can see this little line right here that's in the same column as there's like many ways to do it. One way is, actually you can't do that. All right. So I can just click here, right? And just drag across with the cursor, the selector tool, you could say, in this little area right here. All right. Let me zoom in so you could see that. So I'm right in this part right here. Right? That's not really a track. whoops, excuse me. That's on the same line as these guys here. So I can just click on there, right? And drag all the way over here and then click up here so that all that stuff is highlighted, right? I can copy that and then I can go back to measure 1 here and then I can paste that and that's all there, right? Or I wonder if this will work. No, that's not going to work. Okay, that's one thing. Or what you can do is this. This is another thing you can do. All the way to measure 1, right? And then all these things. Then you can go to events. You can go to cut time, right? And then that's all moved also. So there's a couple of ways of doing that. You know, the most important thing I can tell you guys, all you guys, is that there's no one way to do anything, right? I just showed you multiple ways to like move things around. I'm copying and pasting, cutting time, but it just takes knowledge and then being able to abstractly think like what's the best way to do this, you know? So, okay. So that was an interesting issue for me. I had to think about that for a minute. All right, so that's that. Then let's go here. Oops. Andy, do you know which one it is? Is it audio editing with loops it was?
I believe so.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I remember now. Okay, so Andy did a great job with this. Let me just play you a little bit of his. Oh, this is really being obsessive compulsive. But you see how this high tom is selected? Just hold the Option key down and click on that so that nothing's selected. I mean, it's not wrong or anything like that, but it's just sort of my own compulsive. I like things neat. So let's just take a listen to what Andy did here. Okay, so he did a thing with the maracas, which is this red track here. Right? So Andy's actually plays hand percussion really well in addition to trumpet. So he could probably have played this stuff in. Now, do you hear how that sounds really mechanical? The reason that sounds mechanical is that you're basically playing the same pitch, right? Or the same sample almost on each one of those things. So there's a couple of things that you can do. You can highlight this, and this is you could turn this to elastic audio, and you could transpose it like it's MIDI information. But everything has to be either half steps or whole steps or intervals. If you do that, what if you want to just make these a little sharper, some of them, and other ones a little flatter, so that it gives you the impression that it's not the same exact sample every time you're playing it, right? Well, up here in Pro Tools, there's something called Audio Suite. So if you click on that and you head down to pitch shift, there's something called pitch 2 that you guys all should have, right? This comes with Pro Tools. Oh, here it is. Whoops. So this is pitch shift 2, right? So it's stereo. So what's really cool about this, right? It's got a left and a right. So you notice you've got left, which is the top, and then this is the bottom, this one here. So that's 2 mono tracks that are panned left and right. So you could actually change the pitch of one of these differently than the other one right in here. But we've got these linked right here so that they'll both do the same thing. And for you guys just starting out, I would recommend that as a starting point. All right. So this is an okay, like a B grade plugin, but for our purposes here, it'll get the job done just fine. So it's got all of these controls down here, which I don't want to get into right now, but what I want to teach you is make sure the mix is at 100%, which it defaults to. And what you can do is right here, you've got coarse and fine. So coarse means in semitones. So if let's say I'll play this, right? You can hear that. So if I bring the coarse down, let's say 3 semitones, there's a little speaker right here. That's so that you have to make sure this is selected, right? If you press this speaker, it will give you a preview of what the processing will be. And it's playing it back fast as opposed to this, right? So, or you can just fine tune things down so that it's a little flatter, and you could see that the ratio changes as you're doing that. And then you basically would hit render, and that's destructive. And then you would do that here. Maybe you would do a little sharp, render, and then maybe you'd leave this one the way it is. And then so it did something a little bit that I didn't like there. So I'm going to separate this out here because it added something that another pitch. So maybe it was picking up a little bit of this one, right? So let's go back to there, and then I'll go down, and then I'll render that. There we go. And then maybe I'll just have to clean that up a little bit. Right, so you can hear how that doesn't sound quite as mechanical as, but there's like a little bit of a pitch curve to it now, right? So that's more musical. It's better to have somebody really playing something, but if this is what you're stuck with, right, and you're creating something like this, you can make it more musical than having it just be the same thing repeated over and over again. You can make it sound a little bit more random. And then like with these that are all the same, like you could take one of these and maybe you would just make one of them, maybe you'd do a semitone down. And then you see that how it changes the timing. That's why this one isn't so great, because it doesn't give you things exactly the way that you'd want them. So what I'd have to do then is go back and do a little bit more timing work and just separate that out and put it onto the grid. And then you will hear that actually get a pitch. Pitch Shift 2 is a B grade plugin because it's old. The algorithms are old. It's not as good as some of the newer ones. That's why. It's called Pitch 2, Ashley. If you go to Pitch Shift, and it should be, you should only have a few. I have a lot of other ones in here. Like this sound shifter is much better, but I paid for that. Yeah, I paid for that. It's not cheap. But like I said, for what we're doing here, this is perfectly usable. I've had students do really cool things using this. So I wonder what would happen if I decided to unlink this, and I'll make the right side higher and the left side lower. I don't know. I'm just playing around. Oops. That's weird. So you could hear how that it gets away just from the exact repetition, you know. And even though that doesn't look like it's lining up time wise, because the transient is here and the transient is here, it's going by so fast that you don't really notice that. Like, you see how, like, when I played this is a little bit more human because it's not so perfect, but this is perfect. Right? So it's just like fine tuning these things so that you can add a little humanity to them.
Hey, Pete, just musically and composition wise, is there any particular direction you want to go in? Do you go high, low, keep going high? I mean,
Whatever your ears, I would say that there's no right answer to that. I would say the answer depends upon your goal and what your composition is, what style of music you're working in. That's what I would say. I would say that there's not like a definitive answer to any like a question like that. You'll find if you take another class with me next semester, Andrew, that I tend to really look to make definitions about creativity. You know, in terms of like being technically, this is what you do. That reminds me too much of Species Counterpoint. And I stopped doing that when I was 21. You know, it was a good function, but you got to use your ears and develop taste and practice, you know, because you experiment and that might work great for this piece, but on another piece, I might do something different. And it's just like when Ken asked me like how to move all that stuff, there were a couple of ways to do it. And one way might be better in one situation than the other way would be, but on another situation that might be reversed. So it's just good to have all this knowledge and then use your abstract reasoning to kind of figure out and look ahead to see what the best way to get to the result. I know that sounds a little
no, I appreciate that.
a little new agey, but that really is the way I think about things.
Could you also do that if you put it in time expansion mode, or I forget the name of it?
Elastic audio?
Yeah, with the transpose.
Yeah, but then you'd be stuck to half steps and whole steps, which might not be bad. So let's try that. Okay, so we're going to go into elastic audio, and this is rhythmic, right? So that might not be bad. That might be your best option. So if I highlight this and the option T, and then drag that down -1 semitone, apply, and then this one here goes up 1 semitone, apply, and then this one maybe goes up 3 semitones, apply. So let's listen. Whoops. Boogie-da-bop. You hear it, but like you can hear the ascending pitch there, right? So, you know, that might work. And if that works, this is very easy to do too. You know? All right. So, a couple of weeks ago, when it was like the 30th anniversary of Miss Saigon opening, I gave you guys like a little talk on sort of how I got that gig, right? But I want to just spend a few minutes before we go on with the next bit, expanding upon that a little bit. And because I said something like, create something of value and get it into the marketplace, right? But there's a lot of work that goes into that you really need to think about. So what do I mean by that? Well, there's a little saying that Coach Wooden John Wooden, the great coach from UCLA in the 1960s and 70s, used to preach to his players, is that failing to prepare is preparing to fail. So if you're not prepared, you're more like the chances of you failing are greater. We can look at that in many ways. So a decade ago, there was Superstorm Sandy, I believe it was. Sandy, where New York City was flooded out, right? And it was closed down for weeks. The trains didn't get back to normal for over a year. And that's because, why is that? Because our whole system of governance is not set up for preparing for inevitable situations, because people have different motivations than the truth. You know, everybody has different motivations at some point than the truth, I think, myself included. So what do I mean by that? Well, it's been a known fact that the climate is changing, and you can debate the best way going forward, but to deny scientific facts and to point to specious studies that were funded by people with a different agenda to have a different outcome is really intellectually dishonest. So if climate is changing and the strength of storms is increasing and the frequency of these storms is increasing, and you have historically a lot of damage in coastal areas, and parts of New York City are underground, right? Subway systems, tunnels, and parts of Manhattan are very low-lying, and parts of Manhattan actually have streams going underneath them. You would think that there would be money spent to be preparing to stop the eventuality of a storm like that causing billions of dollars of damage and disrupting people's lives, business, commerce, everything for a long time, you know. And it's interesting that because of COVID and the city being shut down for large periods of time, they were actually able to fix the Williamsburg train tunnel, the L train goes through the tunnel over to Williamsburg from 14th Street. They were actually able to finish that ahead of schedule. Otherwise, they'd still be working on that, and there'd be train disruptions, right? They were going to actually close down the train service in one direction for 2 years to fix that, and then in the other direction for another 2 years to fix it. So in other words, you might be able to have to take a bus into Manhattan from Brooklyn for 2 years, and then you could take the subway home. Why? Because there was no preparation for that disaster, right? And the preparation for that disaster costs money, and, you know, budgets, we could see at Queens College, our budgets are decimated. And, you know, we saw it with the whole response to the COVID pandemic. We didn't have PPE. We had to rely on China to give us PPE. And it got to the point where the guy who owns the New England Patriots chartered a private plane to get PPE from Massachusetts. The governor of Maryland, his wife, I think, is some sort of relationship with somebody in an Asian country, political. I think she might have been like a politician or something. I forget exactly what it was. But because of those contacts, he was able to get directly from China, while everybody else was bidding against each other for masks, for gowns, for all this stuff, because we couldn't make it here because we were unprepared for what had been predicted, right? This was predicted, right? If you listen to things that Obama said during his presidency, he predicted this stuff, right? But, don't want to listen to it. So how does that relate to your lives as musicians? Well, I don't know, because I only know all of you. Well, some of you I know how you play, but peripherally. right? Most of you. But so I can just talk to you about my own personal experience. And hopefully this little lesson will inspire you or give you something to fall back on if the situation arises. So in the first half of my professional life, when I was a professional keyboard player, I had trained for that while I was at college because I played in bar bands. Starting when I was 15, right before I was 16, I was playing in clubs. And my freshman year, my sophomore year, I was playing many nights, multiple nights a week. During my junior year, I stopped for a while, and I drove a cab in Manhattan on weekends, which was fun. But then when I was a senior, I started playing again. But when I was a senior at college, I had decided that I was tired of playing for $20 and $25 a night. And if I was going to be doing these gigs that I hated, I wanted to at least be paid for them because I didn't really like playing in some of the groups I played in. And I didn't really like being out till 3 a.m. So what did that mean? Well, that meant that I needed to play club dates and casual gigs. So I got there was some of you know this, but there are a bunch of organizations on Long Island, club date offices, they called them. And they were places where musicians would get called to do work. So if you were getting married, you would hire this club date office to have a band for your wedding. And basically, these club date offices, they would have several set bands with regular musicians. Some of you that are maybe music majors might know Dr. Smaldone. He was in a steady band, a club date band for years back then. And then other ones were just throwing together pickup things, right? And basically, I started getting hired at this company, Stephen Scott, which is in Great Neck, and they started in 1970, and they're still in existence today. To start playing club dates because it paid 2.5 times what I was making in a bar. So what you do is you'd call in on a Wednesday or a Tuesday or something like that, and they'd say, yes, so this Saturday we've got a gig here, and then from 7 until 11, and then on Sunday we've got one from 1 to 5 over there, and then you're playing with this band, and this is the leader of the band, and you'd show up before the gig, and you'd play the gig, and then on Sunday you'd go play the next gig, and then a couple of weeks later you get a check in the mail. So the first few gigs I did, I was in a very large group, and I was the second keyboard player. So, they just wanted me to get a hang of it. But then they started putting me in with smaller groups. And I was a wise guy, right? I thought that I've got good ears. I can figure out anything on the spot. I can hear these tunes and play them. And, I wasn't prepared. And I went and I went to a gig at the Meadowlands, which is where Giant Stadium is. And it was a trio gig at some sort of catered event. And the leader of the band was the bass player, and he was supposed to lead the band and sing, but he decided that he didn't feel like singing, and so that I had to carry everything, and I didn't know enough tunes on my own to get through the night. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you were going to do a gig like this, what you needed to know was you needed to know a lot of styles of music and have a repertoire of 200 to 300 songs that you could just, anybody tells you the song, they tell you the key, boom, you go. So what does that mean? Well, you'd know I Get a Kick Out of You by Cole Porter. You'd know Pennies from Heaven. You'd know Lady is a Tramp. You'd know some Latin music. You'd know Girl from Ipanema. You'd know Watch What Happens. You'd know Summer Samba. You'd know ethnic tunes. So you'd know a Miserlou, and you'd know a Hora, and you'd know an Irish Jig, and you'd know a Tarantella. Right, and then you'd know some Beatles tunes, and you'd know some ballads, like you'd know "My Way" by the Frank Sinatra or the Liza Minnelli version. You'd know "Evergreen" by Barbra Streisand, right? And you'd know all these tunes, and you'd be able to play them in multiple keys. Because if a singer couldn't sing it in B flat, maybe they'd sing it in G, or if they couldn't sing it in C, they'd have to play it in in A, And then maybe you'd know like some rock tunes, right? You'd know some disco tunes, right? Maybe you'd know Bad Girls or something like that by Donna Summers, or you'd know Disco Inferno by the Tramps or Rubber Band Man or something. And then you'd know maybe like when the band is off, you have to play cocktail piano because these things were continuous. They go from beginning 4 hours straight, and there'd be music from beginning to end. So the band would take a break, and you'd be the keyboard player, and you get paid a little extra to do what they call continuous. So you'd have to play like Misty and Stella by Starlight or whatever. And you just have to know, but literally, if I said 300 songs, you'd be in good shape because every singer would have a different repertoire. And I was unprepared, and I couldn't do it. And I got fired. And they were kind of dishonorable about it. Like, instead of saying, look, Pete, you don't know enough music. Why don't you just take 6 months and learn a bunch of songs, and you've been on some of these gigs, you know what they are. And then when you're ready, give me a call and we'll try you again. They pulled this thing where you'd call, "Nah, we don't have anything this week. No, it's a little slow this week." And then after a month or so of this, you sort of get the idea. They weren't straight up to your face. Well, it's kind of funny that 5 years later, I was conducting a show, a Little Shop of Horrors, and the guy that fired me came up and introduced himself to me, but he didn't remember me. And I looked at him and I said, "Oh yeah, you're the guy from Stephen Scott that fired me because I didn't know how to play Tarantella." And he's like, "What?" And then the next day, he looked my number up on the answering machine, and left an apologetic message to me. But that was kind of funny. But anyway, I wasn't prepared. Did I bother getting prepared? No, because I hated it. I didn't want to do it. It was just for money, right? Okay, so let's move ahead 10 years, or not even 10 years. Let's move ahead 1987, right? So I got out of school in 1982, and October of 1987, I'd been playing for 5 years at the original Little Shop of Horrors. I started off subbing on the keyboard book there. Then I learned the piano book, which was playing piano and conducting, and that was fine. And then I took over and played piano and was the music director for the last half of the run. The show closed, and I had to start subbing on Broadway. And I thought, well, I've been playing shows for a while, so it shouldn't be a problem. And I played in the Radio City Orchestra for a summer, so I can follow a conductor. So I thought it won't be a problem. So the first show that I got into sub with was Phantom of the Opera, right? And that was totally different than anything I'd ever played before. And I wasn't ready to do it yet, but I needed the work because unemployment was running out, and I needed to get prepared. I needed to figure out a way to be able to play that show because it was conducted in a way that I had a hard time following, and also the keyboard player was right underneath the conductor, so I couldn't look at the music and see the conductor over the music stand. I had to basically have the music memorized and be like this the whole time because it was conducted every beat, except for the click track songs. There's a few songs in the show where they got taped music and you're playing along with the click track. That's never been a problem. So I had to figure out a way that I would be able to do this, right? Because the music, I could play the music. It wasn't technically difficult. It was fitting into an orchestra with keyboards that was really tricky for me because I'd been a rhythm section player my whole life, right? Playing with a drummer, accompanying a singer, playing with a drummer, playing with a bass player. And Little Shop of Horrors was basically a rhythm section show. It was 50s pop, 60s pop tunes, right? Basically, with some other things, but it was a small ensemble, and it was right up my alley. It was the perfect vehicle for me to break in. And but I wanted to do this because, first of all the people in the orchestra were some of the best players and freelance players in New York City, orchestra players, right? And I wanted to feel like I fit in with them and belonged in with them. So I had to figure out a way to get prepared so that the next time I played, because the first time I played, it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't great, but they asked me back because they saw I put a lot of work into it, and they wanted to, and they needed keyboard player subs at that time. So I had like 10 days off between shows. And so what I did was the pit would open up at about 5 o'clock. And then by 6:30, I had to be out of the pit. So what I did was I went into the theater every day and I had Xeroxed off the keyboard book for a week. I went in for an hour and I went up on the podium and I looked at the conductor's score and I saw every entrance that I was having trouble with. And I saw who I was supposed to be playing with. And I wrote in my score, listen to the clarinet, listen to the first violinist, listen to the French horn, listen to the percussion, listen to the marimba, right? Listen, so that I knew who to lock in with so that if I was having trouble following the conductor, right, I could adjust my playing really quickly by just using my ears. So I sort of faked my way through it, but that worked incredibly well because the thing was that those musicians played in a way where if you have an ictus and the beat should be bump, 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 they were going bump, 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 bump. And I'm like a rhythm section player. I'm like, this is where the beat is. And they're like, no. This is fake orchestral music. The beat is a little bit afterwards, right? So that, especially where they had repeated eighth note things, right? And the conductor's going bop, 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 bop. And they're going bop, bop, bop. They're going bop, 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 bop. You know, they're like, they're not in, I don't know what they're doing. I can't figure out how to relate all this stuff, right? Well, I used my ears to get through it. And then after playing the show about 15 times, I started getting really being able to, I'm really working on this skill, you know? So I wasn't prepared, but because I wanted it so much, I figured out a way to make a victory, you know, to win or to get to just do a good job, right? I wanted to do a good job. This is what I wanted to do for a living, was be a freelance keyboard player in New York City. And that's sort of where a lot of the work was. So I figured out a way to be successful at it, right? So the thing is that when you're doing something with this music technology, it's like I just showed you, right? With Chris's session there. There's many ways to approach these things. And the more knowledge you have, the more preparation you do, the greater your chance of success is. And preparation, even though I don't have like a compositional method, I do have a preparation method, right? Because there's two sides, there's multiple sides to creating music this way. One side is intellectual, technical. And the other side should be instinctual, where you are in the moment, you're one with what you're doing creatively, and you're just being present with what you do. And there are different parts of the creative process where one of those will be more prominent than the other, and then they'll switch back and forth. But what I always find is that preparing your session before you start to create frees your mind up from so many technical things that you're more able to focus in on being creative. And so just to relate all this preparation stuff, being prepared, being organized, being meticulous with your naming systems, being, you know, like having your things color coded, having markers, all these things that just are they're preparing you to be successful. You know, they make it easier for you to do a good job. No, I wouldn't say I'm talking about having templates set up. I have an issue with templates. Like I watch some of these amazing composers, right? Like Junkie XL, the guy's really terrific. And I don't mean to be criticism. This is not critical of him at all. This works for him, and he's incredibly successful. And I've got a lot of respect for him because he taught himself how to read music, and he's very successful. He's really great. But he has a template with over 1,000 tracks in it. Like, I'd spend so much time scrolling that I wouldn't have any time writing. I like to set up a template per project, but I don't have it so big. And when I need to add instruments, I have it set up so that it's very easy for me to do if I need different sounds. So, but just the basic, before you start writing, you get instruments, you get audio tracks, you get things sort of lined up, you get your time-based effects set up, and you get some instruments plugged in there so that you can just start working and not have to stop your workflow to add another instrument. Command Shift N, 1, stereo instrument track, plug in, expand 2, look for a sound. Okay, back to writing again. It's like, right? It's like you're grooving along, and then all of a sudden you stop, and then it takes you a while to get back into the writing groove again. So, yeah. Okay. So that's what I wanted to say about that. All right, let's have a brief introduction for reverb. Now, for those of you that are MAP students, this is going to be an introduction, and we are going to work with it this semester, but we're going to continue working with it next semester. There'll be more detailed stuff, and then next week we'll do delay, and we'll just start adding some of these effects into our knowledge base. So what is reverb? Reverb is short for reverberation. It's all the sound other than the direct sound source that we hear when sound bounces back to our ears from various surfaces in an environment. These reflections, that's the bounced sound, can number in the thousands, and they all reach our ears at different times and intensities, or at different sound levels. When you're in a small space, these reflections, they come back very quickly, and they're about the same volume as the original signal. That creates a certain kind of a sound. In a large space like Colden Hall or Lafrac Hall, it takes a while for speed of sound, right? It takes time for the sound to hit the wall, hit the ceiling, hit the ground, hit people, bounce off of them, and come to your ears, right? So because and things coming at you at different times that you can perceive, and that creates another kind of a sound. So what we do inside the computer is we use something called a plugin that will create artificial reverb. Now, there are two basic types of artificial reverbs. There are ones that are algorithmic based, which is the most used, and there are ones that are convolution based. Convolution based is like it's like taking a sample or a snapshot of a space, and then the software analyzes that and creates a reverb that emulates that space. That's not something that we're going to work with right now, but I just thought I'd throw it out there for you because I want to use just the built-in plugins in Pro Tools when you're working. So there are typically, what these algorithmic reverbs do is they emulate several different types of reverbs that are used most often in recordings. So the first one we're going to talk about is hall reverb. So a hall reverb replicates the sound of a concert hall. And because they have a large size, they've got very long decays, multiple seconds. So, and you guys all know this, if you're in a concert hall, you can clap your hand and the sound lasts for 3, 4 seconds. In the atrium at Queens College, I think it's a 4.5 second reverb in that space there, which is it's incredibly difficult to have a conversation there because there's so much reverb happening. And it's great. Halls are great for thickening things up for strings, pads, and for orchestral stuff, right? And that's because we're used to hearing orchestras in halls, right? Chamber reverb. Chamber reverbs are similar to halls, delivering a lush ambient soak sound, but they also have an extra dose of clarity. chamber reverbs are acoustic spaces, but they are purpose-built spaces inside of studios to create a reverb sound. So chambers were made by placing a speaker and a microphone, or two speakers and two microphones, or one speaker and two microphones in a room, like a tiled bathroom, a hallway, a stairwell, or a sealed room that was purposely built for that purpose. So you'd send a copy of the audio from a track, and it would get played through that speaker, and it would be picked up from a microphone 10, 15 feet away, or however far away, and that would be routed back into an auxiliary channel in the recording console, and then that track would have reverb on it, and you'd blend that track with the original non-reverbed sound. Chamber reverbs are all over the Beatles' classic recordings, right? And then they recorded at Abbey Road often, Legendary and Capitol Studios in Los Angeles. I showed you that last week, right? So let me just show you what a chamber looks like, because I've got photos. So this is one of the chambers in Abbey Road, right? And you notice that it's all tiled, and it's got these cement or marble columns in there to create some, to make it not such a perfect rectangle or square, to break the sound up a little bit. And this is one of the chambers in Capitol Studios, and that's all over Frank Sinatra's voice. And you could see that this room is sort of like, it's not triangular, but it's got like the side walls are not at perfect parallel, right? Which is really good. And you can see they've got speakers and microphone. And then this is the chamber at Sunset Sound. That's a very old, I don't even know if that's in existence anymore, studio in Los Angeles that a lot of, like the Doors recorded their albums at Sunset Sound. A lot of stuff was recorded at Sunset Sound. I believe Prince recorded at Sunset Sound when he wasn't in Minneapolis.
It's still there. I've recorded there a bunch of times.
Okay, great. It's hard. Some of the studios that were, legendary are no longer in existence. Like Right Track, the Hit Factory, A&R, Columbia Studios, RCA Studios. These places in Manhattan that were just historically famous and many great albums were recorded at, no longer in existence. The only real studio that's left is the power station, Avatar, I think. I think there are some larger spaces in Brooklyn, but I don't really know them. But the only historic, there since the 70s recording studio is the power station. And it was only there because Berkeley, the college, bought it. Otherwise, it would be the condos at the power station right now.
Is Electric Lady still there?
Oh, yeah, yes. Electric Ladyland is still there. Right. Thank you. Okay. Next, room reverb, based on the sound of a smaller acoustic space, like a room. And rooms are all different sizes. You could have a small room, a medium room, a large room. So rooms are good just to add like a little bit of an ambience around a space without something that's going to overtake it and change the character too much. And I'm going to show you, there'll be examples of these things. So plate reverb. So plate reverb was one of I think it might have been the first type of synthetic reverberation system. It's between that and spring reverb. I think plates were around before 1960 because I think from what I read, spring reverbs were invented in 1960 by the Hammond Organ Company. So a plate reverb is a synthetic reverberation system. So basically you've got a steel plate that's being suspended, and it's got some tension by springs at the corners, and the plate gets vibrated because there's a little speaker or transducer hooked up to it, and you send some of the audio signal which activates and excites the plate, and the plate starts vibrating. And then there's a contact microphone on the other end that picks up, that transfers that vibration of that steel into sound, right? And that sounds like reverb to us. And the sound of many sounds of the 60s used plate reverb. I love plate reverb. It's one of my favorite reverbs. It might even be my favorite reverb. And it's great on snare drums. It's great on percussion. It's great on vocals. It's great on brass. And it's just really a great reverb sound. Spring reverb is another type of synthetic reverb. An audio signal is sent into one end of an actual metal spring, or depending, they have tanks that might have 2, 3, or 4 springs. The Fender amps of the 60s, I believe, used 4-spring tank. And this creates waves that travel through the spring. At the other end, there's a transducer or a contact mic that converts that motion into an electrical signal, which is then blended in with the dry guitar sound, typically, because it's typically used on in guitar combos. And I've got an amp here where I can demonstrate that shortly. These were first used on Hammond organs in 1960 and then put Fender guitar amps shortly thereafter. Now, there's 2 other kinds of reverb that I want to talk about. One is ambience, and these are not things that you would find. Does anybody do reverb? Which way, Paul? With a plate?
I meant in using the actual room, like the Beatles.
Yeah. If you record, yes.
People still use rooms for reverbs instead of all this high-tech stuff.
Yeah. Some people that are mixing at Capitol Studios or at Abbey Road will for sure use the chambers. Yes. Yep. They've
Amazing.
there are plugins that, like Waves has an Abbey Road's chambers and Abbey Road's plates plugins, and they sound pretty good. But if you're at the place working, why not take advantage of the real thing?
Yeah, famously, Paul Simon's The Boxer was done. I think that snare drum was in his tiled bathroom.
Actually, that has like a bit of a pre-delay on it because it happens after this. The reverb, actually, you can hear it because I actually use that as in Audio MIDI 2 as an example of how to put a delay on a reverb. But okay, so these next 2 are things that aren't like a plate reverb and a spring reverb. They're mechanical, right? They're actually plates and springs that vibrate. So if it's not trying to emulate a natural space, it's trying to emulate like something that's mechanical. These next 2 are sort of not things that you would find either mechanically or in nature, like a hall or a room, right? And that would be ambience. And an ambience is a very, very short reverb, right? And it's got very little decay to it. And basically what you do with that is, if you've got, for example, a snare drum that's very dry and just want to have a little sheen around it, you would add some ambience to it. And you can't even tell that it's reverb when you're listening. But if you take it away, you can hear the difference in sound. And I'll show you all these things with examples shortly. And then the last one is non-linear, which I don't use very often, but I was playing around with it last night. And actually, you can create some really cool effects with that, which I'll show you in a minute. So there's a style of reverb exclusive to the digital domain called a nonlinear reverb. These reverbs are sort of non-categorizable, but with one difference. In all other reverbs, the tail rings out. As the tail rings out, energy is dissipated and the echo or the reverb becomes quieter and quieter. In nonlinear reverb, the echoes can swell up before tailing out or crescendo until the very last set of echoes. And this can create like a rhythmic effect when you use it on drums. It's kind of cool. So we'll take a look at that. And then this is an EMT 140 plate right here. Do I have spring reverb? No, I don't. Okay. So let's get on with the demonstration. Now, in this demonstration, I'm using the built-in reverb in Pro Tools for most of them, but there's a couple of algorithms that it doesn't have that I had to use some other reverbs. So basically, I've got right here just a snare drum groove, right? Now, that's not completely dry. There is a little reverb on the recording. but it's still dry enough that it'll help us out here. Now, I'm going to show you this technique in a second, but this is Reverb, which we're going to be using, and this is an okay reverb. It's perfectly good for using because it's very easy to understand. And basically, this is the GUI. So along the top line here, you've got a selector for the different kinds of reverb. So it's got hall and church, and those are related. Like a church is like a big hall. It's got plate. It's got 2 different rooms. It's got ambience, and it's got nonlinear. So it doesn't have chamber, and it doesn't have spring reverb. And then right here, it's got 3 different sizes. It's got small, medium, and large. And then it's got a bunch of controls down here, which I'm going to go over in a minute. So I'm going to play that snare drum, and I'm going to add some hall to it as it's playing. Right? So this hall has a decay of 4.5 seconds. So if I hit the snare drum and stop Pro Tools from playing, you're going to hear the tail decay out for 4.5 seconds about, right? So here we go. Actually, let's do this.
Pete, on Zoom, I think your background noise thing cuts off part of the tail. It doesn't sound natural.
I've got that turned off.
Would you mind zooming in as well, too, please?
Yes, no problem. Let me just give me 1 second for the audio settings. Yeah, I've got that turned. I don't have that on. I've got that turned off. Yeah, I don't see any other adjustments here, right? I've got this on low. I don't have echo cancellation on. Well, I'm sorry. Fortunately, this will be up on YouTube with the full fidelity. Fortunately. So,
you have original sound turned on or off?
I do. I think I do.
It should be a button on your...
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was on. Yeah, it was on. So here, let me play this again and see if this... And
that one worked.
Okay.
That was better.
I think what was happening, Ken, was that when I played it, you see if I stop it, there's like a little pause in the reverb. So that's why I copied and moved this here. So let me zoom in on this again so that I can show you this, the GUI of this. So let me go over that one more time. So we've got, this is the GUI of Reverb, right? And you would find it in the reverb folder. Now I've got, dozens of reverbs here. And you might actually have some of these like Revibe depending upon which plan you have. But if you've just got the Pro Tools that we give out from the school, you will only have Reverb and maybe the verb that comes with Air Music Technology, which is not very good at all. All right, so you look across the top. It says hall, church, plate, room, room 2, ambience, and nonlinear. So let me go back to hall. And then over here, you can choose 3 different sizes. Now, this is the decay. That's how long until the reverb stops. So if I hit small, that goes down to 2.2 seconds, medium, 3.4, large, 4.5. You can additionally adjust this by just clicking and dragging on that. So let me go back to 4, and then you can type in also 4.5 because that's basic. And then I'll talk about these other things later on. We don't need to, let's start off with just the amount of information we need to know, all right, rather than everything all at once. 3, 4, boom. Right, so it lasts about 5 seconds. Now, the next one I want to talk about is chamber, and this is a plugin that I purchased. You don't have it, but I want you to be able to see and hear what a chamber sounds like. So you could see that they've got an image of the chamber, and they've got all these controls, and you can change the room. You can change the kind of mic, right? And you could change the type of speaker and whether it's facing the wall or not. So it's got a bunch of controls, but I believe this is the default setting. So let me play the snare drum, and then I will do the same thing I did before. I'll bring up the level of the reverb, and then I'll just play that solo hit a few times. Now let me go over here. Right. So that's a much different sound than. Give me 1 second and I can have both of these up. So let's see. All right. So this is the hall. Right. And this is the plate. Hall. Plate. Now, in addition to the plate decaying faster,
The plate or chamber?
Chamber. Thank you, Park. You know, I got this dyslexic thing with my mouth. You know, those little tiles, they could actually look like plates, like ceramic plates. You know, I'm hungry for lunch. Anyway, thank you. When you hear the hall, it almost sounds like ba-wah. Ba-wah, because that's sort of emulating the time it takes from the direct sound to actually reach one of the reflective points. So let's listen to that and see if you can hear that. It's very subtle, but it's definitely there. And then chamber. All right, so now, whoops. Yeah, Paul. On acoustic guitar, clean acoustic guitar, I love plate myself, personally speaking. Or I like a chamber works. It's got to be a bright chamber though for me, but I like plate on acoustic guitar myself personally.
Great, thanks.
But you might like something different. And also that depends upon the song too. That's again another thing, right? There's times where a plate doesn't work, and you just, it depends on how the guitar is recorded. There's like so many variables. To give a simple answer like that is very difficult for me. So let's move forward, and now I've got a room, right? And let's start again with no reverb, and we'll play and add reverb. Right, and let's compare that to hall. So the hall sounds more like the snare drum in The Boxer by Simon and Garfunkel, and you could actually really make it sound more like that by doing this and panning the reverb all the way to one side. But right, that's sort of more like it. Okay.
Pete, is there a way to make it time-based?
Is there a way to do what?
Make it time-based? Time-based. Change it over time.
Change what over to time?
The reverb.
The reverb is time.
No, I'm saying per note.
I'm not. I'm having a hard time. The microphone's cutting out, so I'm having a hard time understanding what you're saying.
So, just like you do velocity over time, you do reverb all the time as you play each note having a different reverb on the same track. I
can't think of any reason You can automate. Yeah, you can automate the reverb so that some notes have more reverb than others. Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's my question.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, all of our voices are echoing back. Is that happening now? It's still echoing back.
It's not your voice. It's everybody else's.
Okay.
No, it's not happening now.
Yeah. So, okay, I turned off original sound. So, okay. So, and then let's see. Is this still working correctly? All right, great. So turning on original sound doesn't work for what we're doing here, the way I've got my thing set up. Okay, I'm not hearing that echo, so, but it was cutting out, so I couldn't hear that. So let's move forward now to plate. And that's 5 and 6. So, no, is that 5 and 6? No, that's 7 and 8. And we'll bring the plate in. And actually, what I want to do is, this is actually really good. So plate and chamber, room. Let's do plate and room. So listen to how bright the plate is. And let's go here. It's a very bright sound, right? And let's compare that to, this is to the room. You know how dark, that's like, first of all, it's shorter reverb, but it's also darker. Now, the next bit I want to do will be a little bit of a actual live demonstration. All right, so give me a sec. So this is a guitar amp. Hold on a sec. There we go. All right, so this is a guitar amp, and I'm away from the speaker. Can you hear that over the microphone?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a guitar I'm playing. No reverb, right? So let me play just a little bit of rhythm. Now, this amp has what's called a reverb tank in it. It's 4 springs, and then by turning this knob, I can control the amount of signal that gets sent to that reverb tank and that it returns back, and then it gets blended in with the straight unaffected sound of the guitar, right? So I'm going to play this funk rhythm again. Let's see, turn the guitar up would help. And then I'm going to turn the reverb up about 9 o'clock. Right, and you can hear, I don't know if you can hear that, but there's sort of like a brrr, kind of a fluttery sound to the reverb. And that's actually too much reverb for that kind of playing. So I would probably, if I want a reverb with that, I would turn it down a little bit. Now, if I turn it way up, so this is what I want to show you here is how you adjust the reverb, and the amount of reverb is dependent upon the program, the material that you're adding. So if I'm playing like this, that's ridiculous amount of reverb, right? It sounds horrible. But if I'm playing something like this, right? That reverb works with that if you're playing some dreamy thing. So that's real spring reverb. And I actually have a box down in the basement. I actually have to get it looked at because it's making a little bit of a noise that I don't like. But I've got a box in the basement that's about like this high and like you know, like that big, and it's got springs in it, and it's got an audio input and an audio output and an on-off switch, and then some controls for the reverb itself, which is a physical spring reverb, right? And you know, spring reverb's a taste. I know some engineers hate it, but on guitar it can be really a cool effect if used properly. So yeah, spring reverb. Okay. Now let's go back here. I'm trying hard to remember 13th Floor Elevators. What's that? Is that a band, Alan?
Yes, with the heavy spring reverb from the 60s, psychedelic. Texas, you know, Tex-Mex rock from the 60s.
Cool. All right, so this is 11 and 12. So let's have 11 and 12. So this is a just ambience around the snare, around the drum, right? So let's go to 10. Right, so you can hear that it's a little, it's just, here, I'll play just a single hit. I'll mute it. Right, you can hear that it gets thinner, right? The ambience just adds a little fullness to the sound. I'll overdo it and mute it. And then I'll compare that to plate. So here's the plate. And here's the ambience. And then the last one is nonlinear. So that should be 13 and 14. And I'll bring that in. So you can always hear da 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 da. It's almost adding a rhythm to the sound. And there might be like a time when you want that. You know, there might be like a time where you want something like that in a piece of music. So it's good to know about it. It's more of a sound design. But what you can do is you can combine reverb. So if I had some of the plate and that, it might be interesting. Here.
That's the sound of 80.
Sound of 1980s?
80s drums all use nonlinear or gated reverbs.
Yes.
So you listen to the snare drums and stuff and the toms a lot, you know, is that type of sound.
The sound of Phil Collins. Okay. So that's a little discussion about reverb. Now, how do you add reverb? Well, if you had Logic Pro as your main DAW, you would call up a sound and reverb would get inserted, most typically, because it would all come with a preset chain, right into the channel, like that. And voila, you've got reverb. No. I do that sometimes, right? But that's not the way that I'd like you to do it. What I'd like you to do is, let me, so typically what would happen would be historically, right? You go to a recording studio, and a recording studio might have a plate reverb, and it might have a chamber, and it might have one or two artificial effects processors. Like it might have a Lexicon, a 240, a 220, and it might have what's that other one with the big handle on it? The black unit. I forget what it is, but
250.
The 250, right? The EMT 250.
Yeah, and the Lexicon was the 224.
That's it, the 224. Thank you. So they might have like 3 or 4 sources, and then the sound of the room itself, right? But for afterwards, when you're mixing, to add in the sound. And so basically, those limitations actually, I think, are good, because what you focus in on is creating a space for your mix to live, and might have multiple reverbs that would give you different sense of space. So like a very, 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 very basic concept would be, let's say you were writing an orchestral piece, right? And you had 2 hall reverbs. Well, one of the reverbs might have a decay of 4 seconds, and one might have a decay of 2 seconds. And if you look at how an orchestra is set up on the stage, the strings are in the front and they curve around. And then behind the strings, you've got woodwinds and brass and percussion. So maybe you want to have the percussion sound like it's further away than the strings. So the percussion might go into the reverb that's 4.5 seconds long, and the strings might go into the reverb that's 2 seconds long. So you can artificially fake and fool people into thinking that there's a sense of depth, right? So remember I talked about there's 4. What I like to teach the students is that there are 4 dimensions to mixing when you first start out. There's frequency, low to high, right? There's volume, soft to loud, and all the gradations in between and the reverse of these. There's panning, left to right, but there's also whether something sounds close to you or further away. And that's not something that you can really actually really do. You're sort of playing a trick on the ear and the brain when they're listening to that stuff. And this is one of the ways that you do that, by creating reverbs which are different but they fit together, right? And they complement the sound. So basically, when I'm working and I'm mixing, I probably have like 3 or 4 reverbs set up for different purposes, but they all have to work together. And if you've got 20 tracks on your project and each track has a different reverb, it becomes very difficult to make that blend in and sound like a unified whole. And additionally, for some of you, that might run reverb plugins typically use up a lot of CPU, so you might run into CPU issues if you've got a lot of reverbs open. So how do you add how do I want you to add reverb to a session? So what I want you to do is at the bottom so go to the very last track that you've got and you highlight it and you do Command Shift. Oh, sorry. There we go. So right now I've only got 2 tracks open, right? So the drums are the lowest one, meaning that they're towards the bottom of the session. Command Shift N, a new stereo. And so let's do this. I'm going to do 4 stereo AUX inputs. And you could name it if you want. So I put in reverb. And then notice how it sequentially names them for you, right? That's good to start with. You're going to want to change those names to something more descriptive. So in my first one, I'm going to put my D verb, right? And then what I can do is hold down the Option key, click and drag that, and just fill these in. So let's just say I'm going to stay with 3 reverbs for now. And I'm going to use, let's say, I want the first reverb to be a plate. So I name it plate. Okay, so I'm going to call this plate 1. Now, you can play around with all these controls all you want, but for you guys to start off with, what I want you to do is to call up a preset and tweak the preset. All right? And look at the controls on the presets and how they change. So in other words, if you go right into this area here, right, there's preset right here, factory default, and I'm just going to pick a vocal plate because I know that that sounds good on this particular reverb. Excuse me. Now, the other thing I'm going to want you to do is right after you've selected your kind of reverb, right here, there's a gain. You're going to turn that all the way up. All right. And then close this. And now the next thing you need to do is on this aux track, you notice over here you have the I/O, the input and output. Now, if you've hidden your I/O because you're using a 13-inch laptop and you need the screen space, now would be a good time to go here and activate your I/O so that you can see it. So that's input and output. So the top line is your input and the bottom line is your output. So you're going to leave the output alone and you're going to set up your input. So you're going to click your input and you'll notice that it comes up looking like this, and you want to go down to the second option, which is called bus, right? And you're going to pick the first available bus, which in this case is bus 1 and 2. And then you're going to right click on that and you're going to rename it. And that's going to be called plate. Now, why a bus? Well, a bus bar is a piece of metal that is used to transfer energy, right? So typically, I can show you a, right? So you can see that like these all have terminals on them, and you could send all sorts of energy through these. So that's where the term comes from, because oh, I like this lady here. Telephone switchboard. So back in the old days, when you made a phone call, a person, an operator, would take your line and they'd patch you through to somebody else. They would take your signal and put it into this big patch bay and route it to somebody else's signal, and using, there's bus bars in these patch bays where you can transfer signals back and forth from one source to another. And that's sort of like the Reader's Digest condensed version of where the term busing comes from. So it's not a physical bus like a school bus or something like that. It's based upon something called a bus bar. So you've set up your input, you've got your plug-in. There's one other thing you need to do, and you need to do something called solo safe. And that is on the plate, you're going to hold the command key down and you're going to click on the letter S. And you see how that comes grayed out? That means that the solo button no longer works for that. And I'll show you why that's important in a second. So what we need to do is get audio to go the input here and then through this plug-in and come out here, this output. So we route that here in the sends column. So if you don't have the sends column visible because you've been saving space on your computer, you need to just activate A-E. So on our drums, if we click on the top one, which is letter A, click on that and go to bus, you can see that there's plate all named for me. And it's amber because it's activated. Plate stereo. So I select that, and then a little mixing fader is going to show up. And this mixing fader is the amount of, what this does is it allows you to send a copy of the audio that's coming through this track into whatever track you route it to. So we've got this routed to the plate track, and we turn this fader up, and that sends more volume through this plate reverb track. And you could see that as if I play it from the beginning, it's off, right? You don't hear any reverb, but as I bring this up, you're going to hear reverb, and you're going to see the meter here move up. You see that the meter's moving? Now, one of the things you have to develop, and this is only developed through experience and listening, is taste, right? So if this tune is, this is like sort of an up-tempo snare drum on 2 and 4. And that's too much reverb, most likely that's too much reverb. But it's not just too much level of reverb, it's too long. So I'm going to back down the send. And then I'm going to just customize this preset a little bit. And what I would do is, it's too long. The tail is going on too long. So I'm going to just drop the decay down a little bit. And then what you can do is, on this fader, it has an M. That mutes the send. So you can listen to how you're actually affecting the sound. No reverb. Reverb. No reverb. Like, you could tell that that's not right. And, you know, that might be right for your track. That's almost more like adding an ambience, right? So what am I listening to? What I'm listening to for this right now is I'm listening to see that the decay of the reverb is decaying just like a little bit before when the next snare drum comes in. Right? So if I have it turned up here, you'll hear that it's still reverberating when the next snare drum hits. So then what happens is that as it's playing, you're building up more and more reverb because it's not decaying in fast enough, so that you get one hit, then you get 2 hits, then you get 3 hits, and then maybe the first hit is faded out, and then you have 4, 3, and like it just gets really muddy, right? So I'm going to bring that down. And then the level, bring that down. Now, that's not something that you're going to get right away. That's something you have to develop through experimentation. But those are kind of like the steps that you would take, right? So what I would say for you guys to do is just experiment around with hall, plate, and room. Just use those as your options. And again, pick a preset, listen to it, see how it fits in. Is it too long? Or is it too short? Adjust the decay, adjust the level so that you hear it, but that it doesn't dominate the sound. Now, there are times when I work where the reverb is the sound, right? But that's a special thing, right? Where I'm sound designing and I'm creating ambience. I want you guys to get the ABCs down, right? And these are just baby steps to learning how to use reverb properly. Any questions on that?
If you have that Deverb plugged in, each track is going to be a particular setting, right? So if you want to use that same reverb, you would have to put it on any one of the different setting from that reverb. You have to put it on a different auxiliary track.
Right. So in other words, if I wanted a short plate and a long plate, right? You know, for something else, or maybe I wanted a short plate and a room, right? So let me go here, like I told you. So let's see, medium room, okay, and turn that up.
You change your camera, please.
Oh, thank you. I apologize. So that I'm always just a second behind. Okay, so in this one here, I went to the preset and I just picked a medium room. I turned my gain all the way up, and then let's say I had a different drum. Oh, and then I have to set up my input bus 3 and 4. Rename that room. And then I would just change this to room. Right? So I might have the plate just for the snare drum, and then maybe the toms are in a room. Or I might have a couple of different kinds of plate. I might have a longer plate and a shorter plate, right? So you have to see what blends together. But yes, you would have a different setting and a different send. Well, I'm going over this again next week, so don't worry. But I want to just quickly touch on the final for a second. Okay, so I'm going to go, it's Command Shift and the letter I, import audio. And then I've navigated to my downloads folder. Great, and undergraduate students, right? I'm going to select the top one and hold the Shift key down and select the bottom one. Now look, you might be tempted to push this blue add button. Resist that urge. I'm going to say it again, resist that urge. You want to push copy. And the reason you want to push copy is that right now, my audio files folder is empty, right? If I just add everything, it will stay empty. And then you send it to me and I won't be able to look at your project. If I hit copy and hit open, it's going to navigate you to the audio files folder, right? And this is the audio files folder, and watch. See, it's put all of those guys right in there.
Question.
Yes.
If somebody were to make that mistake, is there a way, how would we reverse it? So do we send you an MP3? Would they send you an MP3?
No, what you would do is what I talked about with Chris before is you would save let me just get this in here. So we're going to put everything in a clip list. All right, hit OK. And then everything now lives over here. So if you've done that, what you would have to do is go to File, Save Copy In, Items to Copy, Audio Files, right? Hit OK. And then rename it Tests, whatever your test is, version 2. And save that. And then it copies all your audio files. Boom. Just like that. All right, so save copy in. And make sure that you've got copy audio file items to copy audio files. All right, so yes, somebody.
Is there any way to integrate, like I know in Logic they have, you can like consolidate or gather all the files into one thing. is the only way to do this just to copy it to
No, you can consolidate. You can consolidate the files, right? But I prefer to have a nice clean session where you're starting from scratch. And just consolidating the files creates a new set of files, but the old files are still living in your clips list and they're not accessible. It creates files with new names. So you'll have additional data in your clips list that you don't really need. Does that make sense to you, Mark?
Totally got it.
Yeah. Yeah, you could totally consolidate. Yes, not a problem. Okay. So all of these things for MAP students, right? They all work together. You could tell they're all so you just audition the sounds. And again, if you want to use the material that the graduate and the music, the graduate students using, be my guest, right? Do whatever you're going to have fun doing. But these all work together. So whenever you do anything with elastic audio, it won't be as intense as trying to time stretch the Beatles and make them match with Queen or Radiohead. So you audition these sounds, and the way I'm auditioning these sounds, I'm holding the Option key down, and then you see that the cursor, the mouse, turns into a speaker, and you just click on the name. So, all right, so let's see. I like that. So I'm going to drag this over here. Right? And that dragging you can do. And let's say I'm going to start a measure 3. So 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 1. So this is not quite 2 measures, right? It's kind of weird. So let's just play around with this. Let's use the TCE and snap this right to 120. And let's see if this plays in loop. 3, 4. No, so it doesn't play in time, right? So it's a little weird. So maybe I won't use that. Okay, let me use this one. So I can either figure out what tempo this is, or I can make this elastic audio and use the TCE and just slide it to whatever tempo I want. And then, okay, so I'm going to start out this piece with percussion. So I'm just going to duplicate that a bunch of times. That was Command D. So it's a little off, right? So what we're going to do here is we're going to quantize this to make it fit. So these are some of the issues that you're going to find. And then now I'll duplicate that, and that should be a little bit better. So that doesn't work too well. So that didn't work. So what I'm going to do now is edit this, right? So you have to, these should work together, but you might need to do a little tweaking here and there, right? So I'm going to, let me make this bigger, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So right there, see, that works. That's right on to B2. So for some reason that sounds okay, but when I duplicated it, it doesn't really sound quite as nice. So I could just take those first, go to grid mode. If I wanted to, I could just take the first measure of this, right? And the first 8 bars, first 4 bars, and then maybe I'll look at the bass. drag that in. Maybe I'll start with that at measure 5. Right? And then I'm going to take that into ticks and polyphonic, and then drag that out. And then maybe what I'll do is duplicate that. All right, great. So I've got something here, right? Now I'm going to do some more editing. I'm going to change my grid to 16th notes. Now at this point, we've got started, and we need to have, you know, a few audio tracks for you undergraduates, and I forget what the exact number was, but we need to have some MIDI tracks as well, right? So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to Command-Shift-N. Well, first of all, I'm going to save, Command-Shift-N, and then I'm going to put 6 stereo. I think you guys either had 4 or 6 instrument tracks. I forget what it was, but I'm going to put them in, and then I'm going to put instrument. I'm going to put expand in those, and maybe I'll have like 3 expands, and then maybe I'll have mini grand. Great, so I know that this is piano already. So I'm ready to start working with those things, right? Now, okay, so this, I want to make an arrangement. I'm going to delete this. It's going to be boom, dee da 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 ba dum, boom, be da ba 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 dum. Right? So instead of having it all play all from the beginning, and then maybe I'll copy this and paste it there. 3, 4, 1. And then copy this again and paste this here. Right? So, okay. So now I need to figure out, like, what key is that? What key am I playing in? So I've just record enabled the piano. Whoops, excuse me. Give me 1 second. So it's in C minor, right? So mini grand has really got a lot of reverb in it, and so I'm going to turn that down here. So, you know, I'm just figuring out the key. Is that what it is? Right? You got. So it goes from C to F, and it just goes down the blues scale. So I know that the chords are C minor to F for that. So that's good. So that gives me my sort of my structure, and when I can figure out that maybe I'm going to transpose the bass line, or maybe I'll just use this bass line for this part, and I'll have another bass sound where I can change keys and change the drum feel. So this is just, you know, you gather your materials and you start playing around with this stuff, and you start thinking about an arrangement right at the beginning, and you see where it takes you, right? So I'm going to pick up with this next week, but you guys should be getting started on your final, right? Because the first draft, I believe, is due in 2 weeks from today? Yes, it's due 2 weeks from today. So you should get started on this. And then next week I'll spend some time going over with the graduate students. But basically, what I would suggest for you with the graduate students is to figure out the chord progressions of those things, and just you can jot them down loosely on a piece of paper, right? So what's the chord progression of the Radiohead tune? What's the chord progression of the Queen or the Beatles, right? Just it doesn't have to be anything but a loose outline so that you have an idea of the structure, and then you could see how you can merge and fit things together once you know what the harmonic structure is with those. All right, with that, we've been at it for 2 hours, and that's about it. Any questions? Oh, Ashley, did you saw that email that Tom returned to us?
Yeah, I saw it before class, so I'll
Okay.
make sure to respond to that.
Yeah, just let me know what else I can do to help.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So any questions, anyone? That was a fair amount of information today.
I actually had a question.
Yep.
I'm not too sure if you know the answer to this, right? But a person who is deaf, right, and they're feeling the vibrations, are they mainly feeling reverb or are they feeling direct sound? What is it?
Yeah, that's not. You're right. I don't know the answer to that. I would think that they're just feeling they're feeling vibrations, because sound waves do vibrate, right? They do have a waveform, so like you can actually feel a bass note vibrating as it hits your chest. And I think that might be what they're feeling, but you'd have to probably ask an audiologist that, somebody who's more science-based than I am.
Okay, thank you.
You could also Google it.
Yeah, I'll try that.
All right, everyone. So there was assignments that I haven't gotten to feedback yet. I did work on it last week. I'm going to be really busy with other work this week, but I will have time to go over some assignments. So I'll keep getting them out to you this week as well. Previous assignments, feedbacks on that. Any other questions?
Pete, this is going up tomorrow on YouTube?
Hopefully.
Okay, awesome.
Great.
Thanks.
All right, I will catch you guys on the rebound. Have a great week, everyone, and I will see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.